April 1945. A German general stood in front of George S. Patton with his arms crossed, his uniform still immaculate despite his recent capture, his iron cross still pinned to his chest, and a smirk on his face that suggested he believed surrender was merely a temporary inconvenience. General Major Heinrich von Kleist had commanded panzer divisions on the Eastern Front, had orchestrated brutal campaigns against the Soviets, and now found himself a prisoner of the American Third Army. But he didn't carry himself like a defeated man. He carried himself like someone who still believed in German superiority, who still thought that the American victory was a fluke, a matter of numbers and industrial capacity, rather than actual warrior spirit. And when Patton's intelligence officers brought him in for initial interrogation, von Kleist made a statement that would change the trajectory of his captivity in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. "You Americans didn't beat us," von Kleist said in perfect English, his voice dripping with condescension. "You simply outlasted us. You had more factories, more supplies, more men to throw at us until we ran out of bullets. But you don't have the stomach for real war. You don't understand what it means to truly fight. You're shopkeepers and farmers playing at being soldiers. If this war had been equal in resources, we would have crushed you in weeks." The American captain conducting the interrogation stiffened, but maintained his professional composure. He made notes of von Kleist's statement and asked follow-up questions. The general continued, warming to his theme, explaining how American soldiers were soft, how they relied too much on equipment and artillery rather than actual fighting spirit, how they couldn't match German tactical brilliance or warrior culture. "Your General Patton," von Kleist said with a dismissive wave. "He is adequate as a logistics coordinator, but he is no Rommel. He is no Guderian. He wins through overwhelming force, not through military genius. Any German general given the resources Patton commands could have achieved twice as much." The captain finished his notes and excused himself. 30 minutes later, he was standing in front of General Patton, repeating von Kleist's statements word for word. Patton listened in absolute silence, his face unreadable, his hands folded on his desk. When the captain finished, there was a long pause. Then Patton did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a bitter laugh or an angry laugh, but a genuine, almost delighted laugh that confused everyone in the room. "So General Major von Kleist thinks Americans don't have the stomach for war," Patton said, still smiling. "He thinks we're soft shopkeepers who won through numbers rather than fighting spirit. He thinks I'm just a logistics coordinator who got lucky with resources." He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the German countryside now firmly under American control. "You know what, gentlemen? The General Major has just given me a perfect opportunity. We're going to give him exactly what he's asked for. A demonstration of whether Americans have the stomach for war. And we're going to make it so memorable, so utterly devastating to his worldview, that he'll spend the rest of his life wishing he'd kept his mouth shut." Patton turned back to his staff, and the smile had transformed into something sharper, more predatory. "Here's what we're going to do. General Major von Kleist believes American soldiers are soft because we rely on superior equipment and supplies. So we're going to arrange a little field exercise. We're going to take the Generalmajor and a group of his fellow German officers on a tour of our frontline positions, not the rear areas, not the safe zones, but actual combat positions where American soldiers are still engaging German holdouts. And we're going to let him see exactly what kind of stomach American soldiers have when they're face to face with his vaunted German warriors." The staff exchanged glances. This was vintage Patton, turning an insult into an opportunity for psychological warfare, using the enemy's own arrogance against them. "But here's the twist," Patton continued, his voice taking on that tone that meant he'd thought several moves ahead. "We're not going to show him our best-equipped units. We're not going to parade our armor and artillery in front of him. We're going to show him our most basic infantry units, The men who fight with rifles and grenades and guts. The men who've been in combat for months. The men who've seen friends die and kept advancing. We're going to let von Kleist see American soldiers at their most fundamental level, stripped of all the advantages he claims we rely on. And then we're going to see if he still thinks we're soft shopkeepers playing at war. Over the next 48 hours, Patton orchestrated what would become one of the most psychologically devastating prisoner experiences of the war. Von Kleist and 6 other high-ranking German officers, all of whom had expressed similar sentiments about American military inferiority, were assembled under heavy guard and informed they would be touring American frontline positions as part of their intelligence debriefing. Von Kleist actually seemed pleased by this development, apparently believing he would be able to gather intelligence, or at least confirm his theories about American tactical weakness. What he didn't know was that Patton had personally selected every location they would visit, every unit they would observe, and every scenario they would witness. The first stop was a field hospital located just 3 miles behind the active front line, close enough that artillery fire could be heard constantly in the background. The German officers were escorted into a large tent where American medics were treating wounded soldiers fresh from combat. What they saw there challenged every assumption they'd made about American softness. A 19-year-old private from Iowa sat calmly while a medic dug shrapnel out of his shoulder without anesthesia. The hospital had run low on morphine and was rationing it for the most severe cases. The kid's face was pale and sweating. His jaw clenched, but he didn't cry out, didn't scream, just gripped the edge of the cot and endured. When the medic finished and bandaged the wound, the private's first question was, "When can I get back to my unit, Doc?" The medic shook his head. "You're done for a few weeks, son. That shoulder needs to heal." The private's response was immediate and angry. "My squad is still out there. They need every rifle. I can shoot left-handed if I have to." Von Kleist watched this exchange with a carefully neutral expression. But the American captain escorting the German officers noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. They moved through the hospital tent, past soldiers with devastating wounds who were conscious and alert, past medics working with calm efficiency under terrible conditions, past chaplains comforting the dying. And everywhere they looked, they saw young American men. Boys, really. Many of them barely old enough to shave, enduring agony with a quiet stoicism that contradicted everything von Kleist had said about American softness. Before we continue with what happened next, before you see the rest of Patton's masterfully orchestrated psychological demolition of German arrogance, we need you to do something. Right now, pause and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching this from. Are you in the United States? Germany? Somewhere else? Because this story, this moment when American soldiers proved their worth not through speeches or propaganda, but through demonstrated courage under fire. This is history that deserves to be heard everywhere. If you want more stories like this, authentic accounts of World War II that go beyond the simplified narratives and show you the real human drama, the psychological warfare, the moments when character was tested and proven, then smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the like button if you're already hooked on this story. And here's what we really want to know. After you see what Patton arranged for von Kleist to witness, comment below with your honest opinion. Was this justice? Was this psychological cruelty? Or was this simply showing an arrogant enemy the truth he refused to see? We're going to show you exactly what the German general saw over the next 3 days. And it's going to challenge everything you think you know about American soldiers in World War II. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that courage isn't about propaganda or national mythology. It's about what men do when everything is on the line and there's no one watching except their brothers in arms. Now let's get back to that hospital tent and see what happened when von Kleist was forced to confront the first crack in his theory of American weakness. The second stop on Patton's carefully orchestrated tour was a forward observation post occupied by a single squad of American infantrymen, 9 soldiers holding a position that overlooked a crucial road junction, still contested by German forces. The observation post was barely more than a reinforced foxhole system with sandbags and camouflage netting, located on a small hill that had changed hands 3 times in the past week. When von Kleist and his fellow German officers arrived under armed escort, they found themselves face to face with the kind of American soldiers the general had dismissed as soft shopkeepers. The squad leader was a 24-year-old staff sergeant named Robert McKenzie from Montana, a former ranch hand who had been in continuous combat since Normandy. His face was weathered beyond his years. His eyes had that 1,000-yard stare that combat veterans develop, and his hands were steady as he cleaned his rifle while keeping watch on the German positions across the valley. Patton had arranged for von Kleist to observe this squad during their regular duty rotation, with strict orders that nothing was to be staged or performed for the German officers' benefit. This was to be authentic, unfiltered American combat operations. And what von Kleist witnessed over the next 6 hours shattered his carefully constructed theories about American military inferiority. At 14:30 hours, German artillery began a harassment bombardment, random shells designed to keep American forces on edge and prevent rest. The American squad reacted with practiced efficiency, taking cover in their reinforced positions without panic or confusion. Von Kleist, forced to take cover in the same foxhole as Sergeant McKenzie, found himself pressed against the dirt as shells exploded close enough to shower them with debris. McKenzie didn't flinch, didn't show fear, simply waited for the barrage to end while calculating firing solutions for counter-battery coordinates he was radioing to artillery support. When the shelling stopped, McKenzie emerged from cover and immediately began checking on his men, ensuring no one was wounded, redistributing ammunition, and adjusting fields of fire. His movements were economical, professional, the actions of a man who had done this so many times it had become routine. Von Kleist, watching this display of calm competence under fire, said nothing, but his earlier smirk had vanished. At 16:30 hours, the situation escalated. A German patrol, approximately 20 soldiers, likely remnants of a larger unit that had been cut off and were trying to infiltrate back to their own lines, appeared in the valley below the American observation post. Sergeant McKenzie spotted them immediately and made a tactical decision that von Kleist would later describe as textbook Wehrmacht doctrine, executed by an American non-commissioned officer. McKenzie didn't immediately open fire, which would have revealed his position and invited return fire from superior numbers. Instead, he quietly positioned his 9 men, established interlocking fields of fire, coordinated with supporting artillery via radio, and waited until the German patrol was in the optimal kill zone. Then he initiated the ambush with devastating precision. The firefight lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, 14 German soldiers were dead or wounded. The rest had scattered in retreat, and not a single American had been hit. McKenzie immediately organized his squad to provide covering fire, while 2 men moved forward to check the German casualties for wounded who needed medical attention. This last action, providing aid to enemy wounded even in an active combat zone, seemed to affect von Kleist more than the tactical brilliance of the ambush itself. "You treat enemy wounded?" von Kleist asked McKenzie, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. McKenzie looked at him with an expression that managed to be both contemptuous and pitiful. "They're wounded soldiers, not wounded enemies." "Yeah, we treat them, don't you?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because von Kleist knew that German forces on the Eastern Front had routinely executed enemy wounded, and even in the West, treatment of prisoners had been inconsistent at best. Here was an American sergeant, in active combat, taking risks to provide medical care to Germans who had just been trying to kill him, because that's what his code of conduct demanded. As American medics arrived to evacuate the German wounded, one of the injured German soldiers, a young private who couldn't have been more than 17, grabbed McKenzie's hand and said something in German. Von Kleist translated without being asked. He's thanking the sergeant for not leaving him to die. He says he was told Americans execute prisoners. Mackenzie's response was delivered in a flat, tired voice. Yeah, well, we were told Germans were supermen who never retreated and always fought to the death. Turns out, everybody lies in war. The difference is we still try to do the right thing, even when it would be easier not to. The third stop on Patton's tour was perhaps the most psychologically devastating for von Kleist and his fellow officers. They were taken to a battalion command post where American officers were planning the next day's operations. The German generals expected to see what they had always assumed about American tactical planning: overwhelming force, minimal sophistication, reliance on material superiority rather than tactical elegance. What they witnessed instead was a planning session that could have been conducted by the German general staff. The American battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel named James Harrison from Virginia, presented a tactical plan for taking a fortified German position that involved feints, flanking maneuvers, coordinated artillery and air support, infiltration tactics, and psychological operations. The plan was sophisticated, flexible, and demonstrated a deep understanding of German defensive doctrine, because Harrison had studied it, anticipated it, and designed his attack to specifically exploit its weaknesses. Von Kleist found himself involuntarily analyzing the American plan from a professional standpoint, and what disturbed him most was that he couldn't find significant flaws in it. If he had been defending that German position, Harrison's plan would have worked. The tactical acumen was undeniable. But what really shook von Kleist was what happened when Harrison opened the planning session to input from his junior officers and even senior NCOs. A captain suggested a modification to the artillery plan. A master sergeant pointed out a potential issue with the infiltration route and proposed an alternative. Harrison listened to each suggestion, evaluated it on its merits, and incorporated several into the final plan. This collaborative approach to tactical planning was foreign to von Kleist's experience with German military hierarchy, where orders flowed downward and questioning those orders was not encouraged. You allow subordinates to question your tactical decisions? Von Kleist asked Harrison during a break in the planning session. Harrison looked genuinely puzzled by the question. I allow competent professionals to contribute their expertise to mission planning. That sergeant who just spoke has been fighting in this terrain for 3 months. He knows things I don't know. Why wouldn't I listen to him? Von Kleist had no answer, because in the rigid hierarchy of the Wehrmacht, the idea that a sergeant's tactical insight might be valuable to a battalion commander's planning was nearly inconceivable. The planning session continued, and von Kleist found himself confronting an uncomfortable truth. These Americans weren't just outfighting Germans through superior numbers and equipment. They were outthinking them, adapting faster, incorporating lessons learned more efficiently, and leveraging the intelligence and initiative of their entire force, rather than relying solely on the genius of senior commanders. That evening, after a full day of witnessing American combat operations, von Kleist and his fellow German officers were brought to a mess tent where they were served the same rations as American combat troops. As they ate, K-rations and coffee, nothing fancy, the same food that frontline soldiers survived on, Patton himself appeared. He hadn't been present for any of the day's observations, but he had received detailed reports of everything von Kleist had witnessed and everything he had said. Patton sat down across from von Kleist without ceremony, poured himself a cup of coffee from the same pot the German prisoners were drinking from, and looked the German general in the eye. So, General Major, Patton began, his voice conversational but with an edge like a razor, you've now spent a day observing American soldiers in combat operations. You've seen our medics, our infantrymen, our tactical planning. Do you still believe we're soft shopkeepers who don't have the stomach for real war? Von Kleist took a long moment before responding, and when he did, his voice had lost its earlier arrogance. General Patton, I have seen things today that I did not expect. Your soldiers show discipline and courage. Your tactics are more sophisticated than I had assumed. But, Patton prompted, knowing there was more. But, von Kleist continued, carefully choosing his words, I have only seen one day. I have seen carefully selected examples that you wanted me to see. This proves nothing about the overall character of American forces. Patton smiled that predatory smile that his own officers had learned to recognize as a warning sign. You're absolutely right, General Major. One day proves nothing, which is why tomorrow you're going to accompany an American infantry company on an actual combat operation, not as an observer from a safe distance, but embedded with the unit, experiencing exactly what American soldiers experience when they go into battle. And we're going to see if you still think we don't have the stomach for war. The color drained from von Kleist's face. The Geneva Convention prohibits placing prisoners of war in combat situations. You won't be participating in combat, Patton interrupted. You'll be observing, under guard, with strict orders to stay in safe positions. But you'll be there when American soldiers assault a fortified German position. You'll hear the bullets. You'll smell the cordite. You'll see American boys charge machine gun nests because their mission requires it. And then, General Major, then we'll have another conversation about who has the stomach for war. Von Kleist opened his mouth to protest, to object, to refuse. But Patton stood up before he could speak. 0600 hours tomorrow morning, General Major. Wear comfortable boots. It's going to be a long day. As Patton walked away, von Kleist sat in stunned silence, and for the first time since his capture, he looked genuinely afraid, because he was beginning to understand that Patton wasn't just trying to prove a point. He was systematically dismantling every assumption, every piece of propaganda, every comfortable lie that von Kleist had told himself about German superiority. And the most terrifying part was that it was working. The carefully constructed worldview that had sustained von Kleist through years of war was cracking, and what lay beneath was the uncomfortable possibility that everything he had believed about American weakness was not just wrong, but catastrophically, humiliatingly wrong. And tomorrow, he would be forced to confront that truth in the most direct and undeniable way possible, by watching American soldiers do exactly what he had claimed they didn't have the courage to do. At 0600 hours the next morning, General Major Heinrich von Kleist found himself standing in a staging area with Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, a unit that had been in continuous combat since the Normandy invasion. The company commander, Captain David Chin, a Chinese-American officer from San Francisco, who had faced discrimination his entire military career, yet had proven himself through sheer competence and courage, briefed his men on the day's mission: assault and capture a fortified German position on Hill 394, a strategic point that overlooked a crucial supply route. Von Kleist listened to the briefing with professional attention, and what he heard was both familiar and disturbing. The tactical plan was sound, actually more than sound. It was excellent. The preliminary artillery barrage, the smoke screen, the flanking maneuver, all of it was textbook combined arms assault doctrine. But what struck von Kleist was the way Captain Chin delivered the briefing. There was no dramatic speech about glory or destiny, no appeals to national greatness or racial superiority. Just clear, professional communication of objectives, tactics, and expectations. Some of you will be wounded today, Chin stated matter-of-factly. Some of you might die. That's the reality of what we're about to do. But we're going to take that hill, because taking it will save American lives down the line, will shorten this war, and will get all of us home faster. Stay smart, watch your sectors, trust your training, and take care of each other. Questions? A young private raised his hand. Sir, is it true that a German general is coming with us? The one who said we're too soft to fight? Chen glanced at von Kleist, who was standing under guard 20 feet away, clearly within earshot. Yes, Private Martinez. General Major von Kleist will be observing our operation today. I expect every one of you to conduct yourselves professionally and show him exactly what American soldiers are capable of. No showboating, no unnecessary risks. Just do your jobs the way you've been trained. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, sir" answered him, and von Kleist noticed something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Several of the soldiers were looking at him not with hatred or anger, but with something closer to pity, as if they felt sorry for him because he was about to learn a hard lesson. The assault on Hill 394 began at 0730 hours with an artillery barrage that turned the German positions into a landscape of fire and smoke. Von Kleist, positioned in a relatively protected observation point with his American guards, watched American artillery coordinate with a precision that rivaled anything he had seen in the Wehrmacht. When the barrage lifted, Charlie Company moved forward. What von Kleist witnessed over the next 45 minutes destroyed whatever remained of his theories about American military inferiority. The American soldiers advanced under fire with disciplined aggression, not the reckless charges of inexperienced troops, but the controlled professional assault of veterans who understood their craft. When German machine gun fire erupted from a concealed position, an American squad immediately executed a textbook suppression and flanking maneuver without waiting for orders, their training and initiative evident in every movement. Von Kleist watched a young corporal, he couldn't have been older than 20, lead his fire team in an assault on a German bunker. The corporal took a bullet through his left arm, stumbled, regained his footing, and continued advancing while directing his men's fire with his good arm. When they reached the bunker, he personally threw grenades through the firing slit, then immediately called for a medic, not for himself, but for the German soldiers inside who had survived the grenades and were wounded. The fighting was close, brutal, and efficient. American soldiers cleared German positions with grenades and rifle fire, showing neither hesitation nor excessive cruelty. When German soldiers attempted to surrender, Americans accepted their surrender and secured them as prisoners even in the middle of ongoing combat. When American soldiers were hit, their comrades provided immediate first aid while maintaining tactical discipline. Within 45 minutes, Hill 394 was in American hands. The cost had been 8 American soldiers wounded, 2 seriously, and none killed. The German defenders had lost 14 dead, 23 wounded, and 37 captured. It was a tactical victory achieved through superior planning, superior execution, and the kind of aggressive competence that von Kleist had always associated exclusively with German military excellence. As medics treated wounded from both sides, and engineers began fortifying the newly captured position, Captain Chen approached von Kleist. The American officer's uniform was dirty, his face was covered in sweat and cordite residue. But his expression was calm, almost casual. "Well, General Major," Chen said, "you've now seen American soldiers in actual combat. Do you still think we're soft shopkeepers without the stomach for real war?" Von Kleist looked at Chen, then at the hill that had just been taken, then at the American soldiers who were simultaneously treating German wounded and consolidating their defensive positions with professional efficiency. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Captain Chen, I owe you and your men an apology. What I said about American soldiers was wrong. What I witnessed today, your men fought with courage, discipline, and tactical skill that would be exemplary in any army. I was wrong about your capabilities, and I was wrong about your character." Chen nodded, accepting the apology without visible emotion. "With respect, General, you weren't just wrong about our capabilities. You were wrong about what makes soldiers effective. You assumed that because we come from a democracy, because we value individual life, because we try to treat even our enemies with basic decency, that somehow makes us weak. But it's exactly those values that make us strong. These men aren't fighting because a dictator ordered them to, or because they believe in some master race mythology. They're fighting because they believe in something worth defending, and that belief makes them willing to endure things that conscripts and fanatics can't sustain. He gestured toward his soldiers. That private over there, Martinez, the one who asked about you, his family is from Mexico. That sergeant coordinating defensive positions, he's Jewish. His relatives are probably in your concentration camps. That corporal who got shot and kept fighting, he's from Alabama. Grew up dirt poor during the Depression. This army is made up of shopkeepers and farmers and immigrants and every kind of person you can imagine. And every single one of them chose to be here, chose to fight, because they believe in something bigger than themselves. You can't understand that because your entire military culture is built on obedience and hierarchy and the myth of inherent superiority. Our strength comes from something you never had, genuine belief in the cause we're fighting for. Von Kleist had no response to that, because Chin's words cut too close to uncomfortable truths that von Kleist had been avoiding throughout his military career. The German general had served Hitler, had followed orders, had participated in a war of aggression and atrocity, and he had told himself it was about duty and honor and serving Germany. But standing on that hill, watching American soldiers who had just risked their lives now sharing their rations with German prisoners, treating enemy wounded with the same care as their own, he couldn't maintain those comfortable rationalizations anymore. That evening, von Kleist was brought back to Patton's headquarters. The general was waiting for him in his office, and this time there was no predatory smile, no aggressive posturing. Patton simply gestured to a chair and waited for von Kleist to sit. "I understand you've had an educational 2 days, General Major," Patton began. "I understand you witnessed American combat operations and saw things that perhaps challenged your assumptions about our military capabilities." Von Kleist nodded slowly. "General Patton, I spoke in arrogance and ignorance. I insulted your soldiers and your leadership. Having now seen American forces in combat, I recognize that my statements were both wrong and offensive. Your soldiers fight with courage and skill that matches any army I have served with or against." Patton leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate the apology, General, but I didn't put you through the last 2 days just to get an apology. I did it because men like you, educated, intelligent, professional military officers, you're going to go home to Germany after this war. You're going to be asked about what happened, about how Germany lost, about what American soldiers were really like, and I needed you to see the truth, so you could tell the truth." He leaned forward, his expression intense. The myth of German military superiority, the idea that you lost because of numbers rather than being outfought, that myth is going to be very tempting for Germans to believe after this war. It will let you avoid confronting the real reasons you lost, the moral bankruptcy of your cause, the strategic incompetence of your leadership, and yes, the fact that American soldiers and their allies were simply better than you when it mattered. I needed you to see that truth firsthand, so that when you tell the story of this war, you tell it honestly." Von Kleist sat in silence, processing this, and then asked a question that had been haunting him since watching American soldiers treat German wounded. "General Patton, why do your soldiers fight so hard for a country that, from what I understand, doesn't always treat them well? That corporal I saw got wounded and kept fighting. I heard he's Jewish. Your country has its own prejudices, its own injustices. Why does he fight so hard for it?" Patton's answer was immediate. Because he's not fighting for a perfect country. He's fighting for the idea that countries can become better, that injustice can be challenged, that tomorrow can be different than today. Your soldiers fought for a static vision of racial hierarchy and authoritarian control. Our soldiers fight for the possibility of progress. That's why we're going to win not just this war, but the peace that follows. Because we believe things can change, and you believe they should stay the same forever. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You'll be transferred to a standard POW camp tomorrow, General Major. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention. And when this war is over and you go home to Germany, I want you to remember what you saw these past 2 days. I want you to tell other Germans the truth about American soldiers, not because I care about our reputation, but because Germany needs to understand what it actually faced and why it lost, or you'll be doomed to repeat the same mistakes. Von Kleist stood and, in a gesture that surprised everyone present, came to attention and rendered a proper military salute. Not the Nazi salute, but the traditional military salute of respect between professional soldiers. Patton returned it, and von Kleist was escorted from the office. Years later, after the war, Heinrich von Kleist would write a memoir about his experiences. In it, he devoted an entire chapter to those 2 days, with Patton's Third Army, describing in detail what he had witnessed and how it had shattered his preconceptions about American military capability. The chapter concluded with words that would be quoted by historians for decades. I learned that courage is not the exclusive property of any nation or race. I learned that the strength of an army comes not from its doctrine or its equipment, but from the beliefs of the men who comprise it. And I learned, too late to matter for the war, but perhaps not too late to matter for history, that General Patton and his soldiers possessed something we Germans had lost somewhere in our pursuit of dominance. They possessed the moral certainty that what they were fighting for was genuinely worth the sacrifice. That certainty, more than their tanks or their artillery, was what defeated us. We fought for a lie, and they fought for a truth. And in the end, truth proved stronger than all our vaunted military superiority. If this story changed how you think about World War II, about what makes soldiers effective, about the difference between fighting for conquest versus fighting for liberation, then we need you to act right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We bring you these untold stories every week, the complex human narratives that reveal the real heart of history. Smash that like button if this story moved you or made you see American soldiers in a new light. And drop a comment below with your honest reaction. Do you think Patton's method of forcing von Kleist to witness American combat operations was justified? Was it psychological warfare, education, or something else? We want to hear your perspective from wherever you are in the world. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that history isn't about simplified narratives of good and evil. It's about human beings making choices, fighting for beliefs, and sometimes learning hard truths that change everything they thought they knew. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story, where we explore another hidden chapter of World War II that will challenge and inspire you.